Hey, this is Brian, and I'm here today to shoot a video that talks a little bit about my reading history. The first person that I saw do this video was Ashley at Climb the Stacks, and I thought it was a great idea, just taking a few minutes to talk about how we got to love books the way that we do. For some of the people who I've seen do the videos, this has been a long journey. They started out maybe hating reading or feeling like they weren't good readers or being told they weren't good readers. And that's not been the case for me. I've always felt pretty confident in my reading. There were definitely some steps that got me a little further in my reading journey or got me to read a different way. But I've always enjoyed reading. So the first books for me that I remember reading were some of the same first books that a lot of people read, and that's going to be stuff like Dr. Seuss. My favorite Dr. Seuss book is Green Eggs and Ham, and I remember reading this a lot. Look, this is the party edition. There is no party like a Dr. Seuss party. Yeah, I went there. But Green Eggs and Ham was always my favorite, but we had a lot of these books in the house, and I really enjoyed reading them. We really had about 3 or 4 series of books that were always in our house as long as I can remember growing up. One of them was Dr. Seuss. Another one was a really unique series, and it's this series, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen these before. These are really different. The pictures in these are like just really unique kind of 3D pictures. This is the story of Hansel and Gretel, and I really loved that series growing up as well. And then there was another series that we had that I don't have anymore. My oldest sister has at her house, and they were called Sweet Pickles. And these are really, young kid books, but I really did enjoy reading them quite a bit, and it kind of got me started in reading. But when I started loving reading for myself, the first step into loving reading was the Scholastic Book Fairs. And if you've been at a school that's had those Scholastic Book Fairs, you know how magical they are. That they come around and you get a little piece of paper that lists a bunch of the books. You get to go check them out on those big rolly carts that they have spread out in your library, and you get to pick a few books. And I was lucky. My mom, even when things were tight, she always allowed me to pick a book or two. And so one of the other collections that I would add to a lot were the Berenstain Bears. This is my absolute favorite Berenstain Bear book, The Berenstain Bears and the Bad Dream. I remember reading this like over and over and over, and so since then I've purchased it for my son, and so I'm hoping that when he's ready to read books with paper pages, that he'll love it as much as I do. But so I started reading the Berenstain Bears and things like that. A lot of different kid books. Another book that I'd love to mention, and I wish I had a copy of this, but you just can't find it. I think it's out of print. Is a book called Bony Legs, and I believe the author is Joanna Cole. I loved that book, and you just cannot find it because it's out of print now. So, so those were some of the first books. Now, the next step, kind of the next evolution of my reading, happened because I was in trouble. So most of my first grade year, I was grounded because I could not stop talking in class. And now, as a teacher, I see how that could be frustrating. But I could not stop talking in class, and my conduct grades were never good. We had these cards that we flipped. They were green and yellow, red and blue. Green was great, yellow was a warning, red was you were in trouble, and blue was you were in a lot of trouble. And my cards were always red and blue, and so I was grounded for most of my first grade year until I could get my conduct under wraps, which I never could. And while I was grounded, all I did was read a lot at home. I would go to my library in my elementary school and check out books and take them home because I knew I was just going to be reading. And that's when I discovered the Three Investigators series. So the Three Investigators series is kind of like the Hardy Boys. It's kind of like a detective mystery type books, except for these were kind of signed off on by Alfred Hitchcock, so they had some real creepy elements to them. But I really liked them, and they kind of got me into reading even more and a little bit more mature reading. And also I would read the books that were, I think they're called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and those kind of things. So real creepy stuff is what I was reading a lot of in elementary school. And I just kind of read around. I wasn't like, there was nothing that really drove me in reading. So that's kind of what I did. Now, when I got into like junior high and high school, I didn't read anywhere near as much as I did in elementary school. I would pick up books from time to time, but most of the time they were adult fiction books. I would read stuff by like Michael Crichton, just different authors like that, authors that were popular. A lot of times they were having, their books turned into movies and that kind of stuff. Just not, I wasn't a real avid reader, and I did like to read. I still read, but there was no passion there. So really, it was a while before something stirred up passion in me to read again. And what did it was a lot of people's favorites, and mine as well. And I'm not even going to hold one up, but the Harry Potter series. So my wife and I had been married for several years. We got married in 2002, and in 2007, we moved to San Antonio for my job. I was working for Starbucks, and I became an assistant manager at a concept store there in San Antonio called Hear Music. And so we moved for the job and really didn't have a lot of friends, just one or two friends there that we spent time with. And during that time, I was just like, I need a story. I need to read something and fall in love with some characters and something that will take my mind off of how bored I was to some degree. And so I started reading Harry Potter, and I didn't go into it lightly. I really had no desire to read them, but then I had a lot of friends that were talking about them, so I did my research, read up on what they were about, and on who J.K. Rowling was and what she thought, and decided, I'm going to give them a shot. And I read the first book, and just it blew my socks off. So I mean, here I am. I'm 25 years old when I was first reading those books, and I just loved them. So I read straight through book 5. In fact, I read books 1 through 5 in less than a week. The 5th movie was in theaters, and so I went and saw the 5th movie with some friends, and loved the movies too. So that began my love for Harry Potter. And so I started reading Harry Potter. When I started reading Harry Potter, I started to read a lot of other fantasy and fiction and stuff like that. And so I was really excited to try new things. In 2008, I was still in San Antonio, and I realized that I really did not care too much for my job at the time. Nothing wrong with Starbucks. It just was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I decided to go back to school to become a teacher. So I moved back to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which is where I live. And I started going to school at Dallas Baptist University. And I entered into the honors program there and took a lot of fantastic classes that really challenged my reading in those classes. So I was an English and education major, taking lots of classes on books. I took a class called Perspectives on Early Modern Thought, and one of the things that we had to read in that class was Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment was actually my least favorite book that I read in high school. I couldn't stand it. But reading it in college, it was a new translation. I was older and more mature, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think part of what I loved was being able to talk about it with other people that were also thinking about the literature. But probably two of the classes that impacted my reading the most while I was at Dallas Baptist University are I took a class on Tolkien, on J.R.R. Tolkien, and I took a class on C.S. Lewis. So the class on Tolkien, the professor's name was Dr. Mitchell, who's become a dear friend and a mentor. And we read a lot of stuff. But one of the things we did is, of course, we read a large portion of The Lord of the Rings. And so I got this beautiful edition of The Lord of the Rings for class. And I read some of it, and I loved it. But we also read parts of some of Tolkien's works that I hadn't read, like the Silmarillion. And we read some stuff that was not associated with Middle-earth, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. And I really loved that as well. So that challenged my reading. It got me to reading more fantasy and that kind of stuff. Another thing that I started reading, so in my C.S. Lewis class, we read several things that I'd never read before, like his Space Trilogy. We read 2 of those books. And then we also read Till We Have Faces, which was just gorgeous. But we also got to read some of my favorites, which were the Chronicles of Narnia. This is a beautiful edition of the Chronicles of Narnia that Barnes & Noble sells for like $20. But we read some of the Chronicles of Narnia, and I've got to be honest, I think I'd only really read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Magician's Nephew at that point. So reading more of the Chronicles of Narnia really was great for me. And I discovered that my favorite's actually neither of those. My favorite Chronicle of Narnia is The Silver Chair. So those kind of expanded my reading. While I was in college, I really wanted to read some stuff that was just take my mind off of all the work I was doing. I was working over 40 hours a week at Starbucks, and I was also in school full time and getting ready to start student teaching. So one night I decided to read the book Paper Towns by John Green, and I read that book in one day and just fell totally in love with John Green's writing. And literally over the next week I went and bought each one of his books one at a time and read them and loved every single one of them. And so that was another turning point for me. I started to read more YA fiction and fantasy, and even YA contemporary literature, and that was something that helped expand my reading. Now, the biggest, most recent change, obviously, has been becoming a part of BookTube. So BookTube's changed my reading quite a bit as well. I've read some things I would never have read before. I've started reading historical fiction and more adult fiction that's not necessarily popular, and it just continues to grow. I'm trying to read more classics as well, which I haven't read since high school, and to be honest, didn't really enjoy in high school, but I see the value in now and want to be exposed to it more. So it's really expanded my reading, and I hope that I just continue to grow and develop as a reader. So I don't know if anything I mentioned is something that you've read before or that not many people have talked about that you're surprised to hear me talk about. But let me know down in the comments section, and if you like the video, like it, subscribe, and thumbs up. So, all right, until the next video, see you later. Same lit time, same lit channel.